Yeah, welcome back to macroeconomics. Last time I just talked about what is all this about. We want to know how our economy is performing and what does it mean for our society in general. And yeah, I really recommend that you read about these guys because they did during the last 20 years a deep analysis about this, about welfare, about how we will have, so to speak, good living. And well, the outcome is democracy. We see how our world is performing the next years. Maybe we ignore this result. But anyway, we went then to, yeah, a framework which we have done in general when we look at the performance of the economy. And for this, we look for mainly, three goals. So this one here, steady and appropriate economic growth, price level stability, high level unemployment, external balance. I already told you that this we have to understand from a historical point of view because we are coming from after World War II from a system of fixed exchange rates, and now we are in a system of flexible exchange rate. But anyhow, although it is hard to formulate now a quantitative aim in relation to external balance so that exports should meet imports, it's of course still very helpful in order to explain the economic performance to have a look at the development of external balance. And this we also already did when we looked at the expenditure approach. I think I had it here for Germany, and there we also had a look at the long-term development of our external contribution. And this is, of course, good to have a look at it, although just to formulate the aim that exports have to meet the imports is hard to argue within a system of flexible exchange rates, but we will come to this later. So then we started with the first and maybe the central aim, steady and appropriate economic growth. There, in order to summarize this, we have a look at the central indicator, real GDP, and for developed countries, we more or less can say that we think that the economy is performing quite okay if we have a growth rate of around 1 to 3% per annum. And steady and appropriate also means, of course, this is a long-term aim, but this doesn't mean that we want to have a large fluctuation around this quantitative aim of 1 to 3%. So the aim is really to be just in this corridor and not to jump from 0 to 5% and back to -1 to +7 and so on. Okay, and then we deeply talked about what means real, because in general we had the definition of GDP, market value, and this more or less means it is something like if you look at an enterprise, your revenue every year, price times quantity, and then of course we could increase this number just by increasing the price, but we are looking at the whole economy and then we can make the thought experiment if overnight, and this was actually done 200 years, no, 250 years ago by Adam Smith, that he did this thought experiment. Well, if overnight oil prices are doubling, is there really real, is there a real change in our economy? And then we would say, well, are we feeling better now? And the answer is, of course, well, only just the numbers on our coins, on our money has changed and nothing else. So if we want to interpret GDP, change in GDP, as a change of standard of living, of welfare, then we have purely to look at the change of the quantity. And this is not trivial. And there I explained to you that we, some 20 years ago, we changed from the, so to speak, easy approach. And the easy approach is, of course, if we only want to have a look at the change of the quantity, then we just fix prices. We look and we are measuring every quantity just with relation to a fixed price basis. This we have done quite long, but of course, goods are changing. We are inventing new goods. So today we cannot take the price basis of 1970. This, of course, we haven't done in history. So we always changed every 5 years the price basis. But this we have to do then for every year in history. And this means then that the development of real GDP also changes every 5 years. Well, the fluctuation is not that large, but there is a fluctuation. And then, of course, you don't have a stable time series in history. And go to the beginning of our lecture. In general, we want to look how performed our economy in the last 5-10 years in order to learn something for the future. And then, of course, it would be quite good if you have stable historical data. And, of course, changing every 5 years, if we change now the speed of innovation, which we have, especially due to digitalization, then, of course, 5 years is also nowadays a quite long period. If you just think of our now main good, think of what you are doing with your mobile phone right now and what is the ability of your mobile phone today compared to your mobile phone 5 years ago. These are not totally, but these are different goods. And therefore, we are now go to a so-called chain index. So every year we measure the today quantity in prices of last year. And here is then the chaining that then every value of today is depending on the value of last year. And well, of course, this is somehow at a first look at it a problem, because then you say, okay, then I have always to go back in time 1 year. When do I start? Well, but this is at a second look not that large problem, because we are not interested deeply in the absolute number of real GDP, but in the change of real GDP, or in the relative change. And then, of course, we can say this doesn't depend from the growth rate isn't dependent on the starting point. So I made just this example. If we say we are comparing revenue of some enterprise and we are measuring this in euro, and let's say we had a revenue last year of 100 million euros and this year of 110, then we are increasing by 10%. And if we just taking the exchange rate to US dollar, 1.1 I think today, and if we then comparing 1.1 times 100 with 110 times 1.1, this of course is still 10%. So it doesn't depend on the starting point. And I also, if you go to data, I told you that we also shift every 5 years our starting point. So right now, the starting point is 2020. And I think in 2 years or 3 years, we are then shifting it to 100 equals the index of 2025. And this is just a convention because we want to have an index number in the neighborhood of 100. Okay, so the definition is then quantity today times prices of yesterday, last year, divided by the nominal GDP of last year, quantity last year, prices last year, times our index of last year, and there we are fixing some index in the past by 100. And if we have this, then real economic growth is just the relative change of the index of real GDP. And of course, also in order to interpret the performance of our economy, we are looking also at the so-called GDP deflator, and this then can interpret it as the overall price index of the whole economy. And please keep in mind, and we will also talk about this discrepancy, what are the implications for the economy, that this is not the same what we call inflation, which is calculated via the so-called consumer price. We will also define consumer price, but already right now we can have a look also at the expenditure approach. And if we look at the expenditure approach, there we have the part private consumption. Well, and on this part is in general relying our consumer price index. So what is an average price of a basket when we are going to supermarket, when we are going to holiday and so on? This we take all together. And then we see, well, this is the largest component of our economy, 55% roughly, but it is not the value of the total economy. And therefore, of course, these are differing. Okay, and then we went to one numerical example because, I have the idea that if you are studying economics, then you should also know when you are reading in the media last quarter, German GDP has shrinked by 0.2% relative to the former quarter, that you in general know where is this number coming from. And please, we will also go at other examples through this calculation, that you really do it in your recapitulation of this lecture. Well, in general, what is it all about? Just calculating these growth rates. So in general, we have then the nominal growth rate, we have the real growth rate, and we have the price development measured in the relative change of GDP deflator. I think it is not that hard, but you have to do it not only once. Please do it 3, 4, 5 times. And I think then it would be not that problem. Okay, so this the central development, and then let's have a look at the historical development. And here, not very surprising, we see that in general nominal GDP is growing faster than real GDP. And this in general means that in general we have a positive price development. So if we look here, especially here always, and especially if we look here at the last 3 years, there we have this very large difference. So in general, nominal GDP is growing faster than real GDP, especially in the last 3 years. There a really huge increase of nominal GDP, and then think of Adam Smith, 7%. So we are coming from 3.8 billion euros GDP of Germany, and right now we are at 4.1, so 3 trillion. We are here in the English course, trillion euros. So an absolute change of 300 billion in the last 3 years, roughly. And if we divide this by 80 million, then we have also per capita a huge increase. And we are feeling better because of that during the last 3 years? Well, unfortunately, we have to say no. And actually, if we look here, especially at the growth rates in not only here in 2022, there we see that even real GDP has decreased as nominal GDP has risen by roughly 6%. Well, we have one exception, I think, only, and this was here in the year 2000 when real GDP growth was larger than nominal GDP growth. Well, did we have had an inflation, a negative inflation rate in this time? No. This was not the case, but in this time we had, a large distortion in the export and import prices, the so-called terms of trade, and this was the reason for the this change that we had in the beginning of 2000, larger real GDP growth compared to nominal. Reason was distortion due to export and import prices, the so-called terms of trade. Okay, what else? Then more or less the difference between real GDP and nominal GDP growth rate, then of course we see here almost always positive relative increase of GDP deflator, and again here in the year 2000 you see the negative one. And in order to summarize this, then we can say nominal GDP represents changes in prices and quantities, so P times X, both can change, and relative change of real GDP represents only changes in quantity, and this is then the indicator which we are relating to in general economic performance. And when we value then the economic performance, is it good or bad? And with a relative change of GDP deflator, we can correct in order to change nominal to real GDP growth, and this is then only the change in P. So change of P and X, only change of X, and roughly spoken, change only in prices. And I think this is the last one I want to look at, and is then if we want to interpret change in real GDP with standard of living, then of course also we have to correct for the development of population, and what we see here is roughly until 2010, 2011, almost no difference between real GDP growth and real GDP per capita growth due to a roughly constant population in Germany. Well, and this sometimes people forget, especially if we look in history a comparison between the the economic performance in Germany or also in the European Union or the Eurozone together, because there we have a much less fluctuation in population compared to the United States, which are over the last 50, 100 years an immigration country. And if you look just at the change of real GDP in the United States, then you have to keep in mind, well, you have always 0.2, 0.3 or 0.4 percentage points of their economic growth is due to the population growth. But for Germany, for the last 10, almost 15 years, right now we have there a change that already here in the aftermath of the financial crisis, you see already that, of course, we have very low real GDP growth rates, that the nominal GDP is growing roughly twice as fast, not the nominal, the per capita GDP is growing almost twice as fast in these times. And this was due to, you see here, 2010 and 11, Germany came very fast back after 2009, the high level point of the financial crisis. And this then made us quite attractive, especially for people of the southern part of Europe. And there, many people, especially from Spain, were moving to Germany. And then you see here, especially 2015, 2016, also almost a double increase relative of per capita GDP and real GDP. And this was the civil war in Syria. And these two also we have this because of Ukraine. Okay, and now let's go back to our magic square. And we want to have now a look at the second main aim, price level stability. So I think you already know this. Maybe you have heard about this in school, or if you are looking at the media, that in general, price level stability, we talk then about inflation. And inflation, I said already to you, is measured with the so-called consumer price index, CPI. And then we are doing now for 25 years a very famous social experiment in Europe or in the Eurozone, namely that we have delegated the institution which is deciding about how to stabilize prices from a national institution to a supranational institution, the European Central Bank. So the European Central Bank has a look to all countries of the Eurozone. It is not a national decision anymore, and therefore, of course, when we are talk about price level stability, then of course we need a common concept how to measure prices, and this is then called the so-called HCPI, harmonized consumer price level. So harmonized for the Eurozone, but HCPI is in quotation marks almost calculated in the same way as CPI. Well, there are some difference how you value, for example, what is the price of if you are living in your own flat or if you are paying a rent. This we also already discussed in the concept of GDP. It is not definitely clear how to measure this, and there is the main difference between these two price indexes. I mentioned this because sometimes in media, this price index or this inflation rate we read in the media every month. It is measured every month. And sometimes then you are reading different numbers in the media. And the reason is then that once the journalist is talking about the change of HCPI and in the other case in the change of CPI, but the difference is when we have an inflation rate, let's say, of 2.6% or something like this, then the difference is yeah, maybe 0.1 or 0.2 percentage points. So in one article, then you read 2.8, and in another article, you are reading 2.6%. Well, and then here in this case, we have a, so to speak, definite aim. When we have looked in for the quantitative aim for GDP growth, then you have more or less a rule of thumb. Well, something between 1 to 3%, but you don't find it anywhere written down that this has to be the aim. In the Eurozone, there we have a definite aim, and this aim is then the governing council or the ECB defines price level stability with an inflation rate of 2%, and that this inflation rate is in the medium term, and we can have an overshoot or below it in a symmetric way, so that we allow for a deviation from this 2% aim, that during some time you could have, let's say, 1% or 1.5%, and then you are allowed for the next 2 or 3 years that you overshoot to 2.53 or 3.5%. That positive and negative differences are equally undesirable, and this is important equally because this has changed in 2019, and this we introduced in 2019. Until 2019, the aim was also 2%, but below 2%. So not symmetric. So in during these times or until 2018, it was undesirable to have inflation rates larger than 2%. Well, and if we go back in time, what was the reason in order to change this? Well, after the global financial crisis, and I will show you also the historical time series, but maybe you also remember this, we had a time of almost 10 years where we are really desired, please, price, come up. So we had a time period, a very long time period of an inflation rate of around 1% or even below 1%. Well, and then Corona came, price speed it up again, and Ukraine war together, and just we had this overshoot on the monthly basis of almost 10%. And now we are quite happy that within now 2.5, 3 years, we came roughly back to 2%. Okay, so inflation rate, important, not measured via the GDP deflator, but by consumer price index, and this we will define in a minute. But we can also in general ask, why should we have price level stability? Because I also already mentioned, if we in general say, let the market do everything in order to solve the main economic problem, we have scarce goods and services, scarce resources. How should we divide this in our society? Well, let's do it. Let's let it be done by the market. Then we will have somewhere an equilibrium price. And from this point of view, we cannot say that there is a reason to have a stable price for some specific good. But we can, I think, clearly argue that it wouldn't be a good aim to fix, so to speak, every prices, or to say that every prices for every single good and services in our economy do not fluctuate very much. Think, for example, for the prices of fruits in the supermarket. Of course, they are changing in a very high way during 1 year due to seasonal adjustment, because in winter times we have to import strawberries from maybe New Zealand, and then the price is very high, and in autumn the strawberries are growing just outside here, and then the price are much lower. Um, but we can argue that in general, something like an overall price level should not fluctuate that much, because, of course, in order to derive a supply function or a demand function, then the logic behind is that if we look at the prices of our goods, then we think that this is a signal of the scarcity of these goods. And we are calculating, think of your microeconomics course, I have roughly 1,000 euros per month, which I can spend just due to my preferences. And if we then think not in a static way, but in a dynamic way, then it's not very easy to calculate my optimal basket to consume when in behind I say, well, I have no idea where is the general price level in my economy tomorrow. Where will it be go in the next 2 or 3 years? And in order to have more or less a stable supply, a stable demand function, not for a single good, but in general, it would be good for the economy if I have a more or less stable price level. Because if it's too volatile, then my expectations about the future are also very volatile. I don't know if in the last year some one of you was going when you went to in the holidays to Turkey. In Turkey, you right now have a really huge inflation, and then you really ask yourself, well, I went to this resort or something like this the last 5 years, and now should I really go there? Then you ask yourself, well, maybe I have to pay the double price compared to last year. And I don't know if we have tourism students in here. Due to this, we actually right now see that we have an implication of the number of tourists going to Turkey compared to the same regions going to Greece. So we see that not many, but some people now decide, well, if we want to go to holidays in this region, then I don't go to Turkey, but I will travel to Greece. And the main reason is the situation of price development in Turkey. Well, then of course, think of the circular flow and the household sector. In general, we are not only deciding between which goods and services I should buy, I also think of how much of my 1,000 euros per month should I directly spend, should I consume, and a part of from this I will keep in my pocket in order to save it for the consumption tomorrow. And well, this of course, how much do I save also depends on the general development of prices. Because why? Well, if you think about it in a rational way, then for me it is not important how much money I have tomorrow, but how much can I buy with the money tomorrow? And what is the dependence to the development of the price level? Well, if I take back from my 1,000 euros, let's say 200 euros I save, and in the next 1 or 2 years, prices are increasing by 10%, then these 200 euros are in the future less worth than today. Because if I spend them today, I can buy more goods and services compared to tomorrow if in the next 2 years I have very high inflation rates. So a volatile inflation rates or high inflation rates have therefore a direct impact on my consumer savings decisions. And of course, think also in relation to the circular flow, then we said that aggregate savings, with the aggregate savings, I am paying my aggregate investment. And investment is also very important for our economic performance. And if this decision, how much do I save, is unstable because of volatile price development, this is also bad for the economy. So this is also a quite important explanation. Why is it a good aim to have in general an stable price level, the preservation of money, and this of course is directly related here to the last bullet point, because then you have more or less a stable decision between consumption and savings. Well, and then there is one direct effect. If prices are always changing, then if I'm selling something, then I always have to change the price signal on my good. Well, in a digital economy, it is not that hard anymore. You can program it that in the internet your price is always changing. But think again, if you are buying something in the supermarket, then at every milk, sausage, and so on, then you have there your price sign, and this has always to be changed if prices are changing. And therefore, this is called the so-called menu costs. And in relation to our savings decisions, this or an unstable price development over time in the medium or in the long term, of course, also makes an injustice between the creditor and debitors within our economy in the financial sector. Because if you have high inflation rates and I take a credit from you, then so to speak, I get good money from you today and then I repay it in the next years. But we talked about this already here in the argumentation for the preservation of the value of money. And then I give you, so to speak, bad money back. Because due to the price increase with the money you got back from me, you can buy less goods and services tomorrow. Well, and what is then your reaction as a debtor? Well, you want to have higher interest rates. What means higher interest rates? Higher interest rates means that a credit is more expensive. And then we are again by the aggregate of total investments in our economy. This means investment in general will be more expensive. Because quite often, for my own, I do not have the amount of money to do the investment just by my own cash. I have go to my private bank. I have go to the financial institutions in order to get a credit. And if I have to pay a high interest on this credit, this is more expensive for me. And then, of course, the volume of investment is going down. And on the other hand, 20%, again, expenditure approach of GDP, 20% of our GDP is investment, and think especially at this today's situation in Germany, we need investment, especially in infrastructure, due to the changes of climate change and so on. Then, if we are not investing because of fluctuations in the price level, then it's also overall bad for our economy. So these are then, so to speak, the main reasons because why we have this aim of price level stability. And now we come to the definition as we have done it for GDP, how we definitely measuring inflation, how we measure the value of money. This we are doing with a price index. And what is this price index? Somehow in the same way defined as we defined GDP. It is just the price index of a representative basket of some single goods. So what we are doing is we think of a representative consumer. What is a representative consumer in general buying every month, every year? How much, how many goods? So what is a representative household consuming? So there we look at every single good goods and services. And then, of course, we have to weight these consumption of the single goods and services. Look at, for example, in Germany, we are drinking very much milk. So then we have a liter milk. It's, I think, €1.20, €1.30 or something like this. This is the price of this liter milk. And then I think everybody of you or you are sticking together in some flat, but within your flat you have one washing machine. So we are consuming also a washing machine. But then, of course, a liter milk over 1 year roughly, I don't know, 150 liters or more. A washing machine we buy maybe every 5 years. But both are consumption goods. And then, of course, we cannot just say price of a liter milk and plus price of a washing machine. Then we have to weight these two goods relative to each other. That we say, well, every 5 years, so we have to divide the price of the washing machine roughly by 5, and liter milk we have to multiply it by, let's say, 150, the average consumption of the quantity of milk. And from this, then we obtain the weighting factors. And then, if we know these weighting factors, we are determine every price at time t, and this is taken every month. And what we then are doing is just taking the value, the weight, times the price, summing all up, and this is then the value of our basket. And then again, as we did it at GDP, we choose in history one starting point, because again, we are not that interested in the absolute value of this basket, but in inflation rate, so the relative change. So again, we choose one part in history where we set a value, let's say 2,470 euros. What is the value in euros of this basket? And this number is then set to 100. And then again, if we have this index, the relative change of this index is, where do I have it? Here. The relative change of this index is again our inflation rate. So this is then, or these two slides are then, the general way how you do it. And then, of course, we have a specific number which we are reading in the news every month. And for this also, of course, we have a definite definition. And if we go to the statistical office of Europe, situated in Luxembourg, then the definition by Eurostat is: the harmonized indices of consumer prices measure the changes over time in the prices of consumer goods and services acquired by households. This means we look, so to speak, on the average consumption of a household. They give a comparable measure of inflation as they are calculated according to our harmonized definition. So in every country of Europe, especially the Eurozone, it is done in the same way, and this is then available on the monthly or yearly basis, and this is broken down to some detailed consumption categories. Behind this, I think it's roughly 1,000 single goods and services, but here I showed you these are then the main categories where you can, so to speak, also look up the performance of the prices in this subcategory. So foods and beverages, alcohol and tobacco, clothing, shoes, and so on. So this is also, hopefully this still works. Let's see. Yeah. So if you click on it, I understand it, then you also just come to the website of Eurostat in order to see the actual development. Well, and then hopefully you have already seen it. What we are doing here is what you have seen in your introductory courses of statistics. We again do just some averaging process, and this is then the arithmetic mean, but it is a generalized arithmetic mean that here we have the weight times price, and this I forgot. Also, we define then that the sum of all weights add up to 1. So then we can interpret if the weight is 0.35. This category has a weight of 35% in the consumer price index I1 up to N. So, and then 15 minutes left. Again, we will do it just with some example. So here I can also click in. Yeah, I think this is now if we compare this also with the calculation of our GDP growth, it is not that hard to do it. So at first, we again look now at a consumer price consisting of two goods or two categories. Here, two goods, milk and butter. And milk should have a weight of 30% and butter should have a weight of 70%. So they are adding up to 1. And this is the price development of milk, and this is the price development of butter. So at first, how do I calculate the value of the basket? What do I have to do? If you go just back to the former slide, the value of the basket is then the weighted sum of all our prices of our goods. What do I have to do? Also the internet? Yep. Yes, and then? Yes, the sum of both. So equals to price of milk in 2017 times 30% plus 0.8 times 0.7, and that's it. And again, this we have to do for every year. And as I did it for the GDP calculation, that you know what we have done. If you recapitulate this, 0.8 times 0.7 equals 0.86. Okay, then we said in history, we set 1 year at 100. So we can choose 2017 for 100. Well, if you are doing it at home, what you can also just do is try to calculate inflation if you just set 2019 at 100, and you will see that we come out with the same inflation rate. But now we set here 100. So what we are saying, 0.86 equals 100. What is then 1.03? What do I have to calculate then? If 0.86 equals 100, then 1.03 is not the result, but what do I have to do? Yep. Yes, definitely. So, or let me directly write it down before I calculate this too. So we have to do the two relations as you said it. So 1.03 over 1.886. Oops. This is our index we want to have relative to 100. So, and then we come up with what you have, 1.0, oops, 1.03 over 1.86 times 100, and this I cannot do in my head. Oops, here we are, equals over 0.86 times 100. And this we put down here. Let's do it in percent and, oh, not percent. I just wanted to have 2 digits. So now we have it. So, and then inflation. Yep, yep. Oh, then where is where's my formula? There have to be this definitely right. And this is always, and this is a good sign when we are just using our software and say, well, we are just going through it. Then also have a direct look. Well, is the outcome, is it economically meaningful? And here you have seen, well, there has to be something wrong because we have here an increase. And then, of course, we have to have also an increase on the right side. So here I have to have made some mistake, but I don't see right now my formula here. Why don't I see it? Then let's do it again. So equals 103 over 0.86 times 100. And now it's okay. I don't know what was the mistake here when I copied it down here. But now also if we have in general roughly a look at the numbers, then you see an increase of 0.86 to 1.03 is compared to the next increase quite large. And here we have 20 points and absolutely, and here only 2. And so we see, okay, this seems to be okay in general. And now the inflation. Very good that you directly have seen this. Because in an exam, if I pose a question, then sometimes I wonder a little bit. Then I also maybe give you, for a starting point, real GDP is increasing the last 2 years, let's say, by 3%. And then you also have to fill a table like this. And then I see that my students are writing down not an increasing index. And then I say, well, if I read GDP is growing the last 2 years, well, of course, everybody, like me here, of course, also if you write an exam and it's stressful, then we are doing mistakes. But always to have just in the end the check, is the outcome meaningful? And if I see then, as your fellow student just saw, well, there a number is decreasing and this cannot be the case. There has to be something wrong. And then you have to go into the calculation. And there, by all stress you have in an exam, I sometimes wonder, well, you see, I say you are starting at 4 billion, 3.3% growth, and then you end up with a number of 3.9 trillion for GDP. And then I say, well, when you are reading the task, then you should know that there has to be something wrong. Okay, but inflation. Inflation is just a growth rate, and the growth rate is always value today minus value yesterday over value yesterday. So what we have to do is 119.77 minus 100 divided by 100. Well, and since we are starting from 100, then we directly can read the inflation rate. It has to be 19.77%. Okay, but I will take the formula equals 100. There I have to fill in brackets, 190 minus 100 over 100 and going down. And now let's format in with percent. And these are our inflations. And in order that you don't think that it is always just looking at the absolute change, I will take this one. 3 is then 121.51 minus 119.77 over 119.77 is 1.46%. So, and then I ask the evil question, inflation rates for 2018-19. This we have, and now I want to have the average inflation rate. how do I have to calculate the average inflation rate? Well, again, we have an index coming from 100, increasing to 121. What is then the general task? Average inflation rate. This means which constant inflation rates over 2 years will have the result that from 100 we end up at 121.51. So 1 plus p bar, pi is the general letter which we choose when we are take an abbreviation for inflation, equals 121.51, and this then means we have 121 over 100 taking the root, because this of course is 1 plus pi bar squared, so up to the power of 1/2 minus 1, and that you also see we are doing here some averaging process. Then I can write for this 121.51 over 119.77 times 199.77 over 100 to 1/2 minus 1, and these two are again the so-called inflation factors of 2018 and 2019. And what is an inflation factor? Well, this is just 1 plus the inflation rate. So explicitly, let's take this. This is 1 plus inflation of 2019, and this is 1 plus inflation 2018, and let's take this in red. This again is then the geometric mean of inflation factors. So, and this we also want to calculate. So what we have to do, average inflation is then 121 over 100, taking the root or exponent of 1/2 minus 1. And let's also compare this with the average via the arithmetic mean. Then this would be just the sum of these two divided by 2. Oops, this is wrong. This and this. And there you also see percent. No, let's take this in green. That you have here a difference of 0.5 4 percentage points. So this is only the approximation, and as I told you, in general, that you have only a difference in the second, third, fourth digit or something like this, then you should keep in mind that your that your growth rates here, the inflation rates, shouldn't be larger in an absolute value of 10%. Then you roughly can just choose the arithmetic means. Otherwise, in order that your error is not that large, you have to choose the geometric mean. Okay, also please go through this calculation, because unfortunately over the last 10, 15 years when I'm giving these lectures, I don't know why. It is just calculating the weighted arithmetic mean and then calculating the relative change of this number. I get many, many different answers if I pose these questions. So almost all possibilities, taking plus, minus, multiplication, division of the given numbers together, all permutations I get as an answer. And I think this is a pity. Somehow it is possible that you make some mistakes, but it's quite often 10 to 20% of my students which do this calculation wrong. And if you go through examples, then I think it is not that hard. Okay, so today I'm in time. Thank you very much for today and see you next week.